everyone. Thank you for your patience. We are going to go ahead and begin. First, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Bridget Goldstein. I am the founder of Breaking Christian Nationalism. And I thank all of you for being here and being concerned about this thing that we call Project 2025. I am from Mineral Wells, and I started Breaking Christian Nationalism because there was nothing out there. No one was saying what this thing was. So I got into it, started digging into it a little bit more, and realized, oh, people got to know about this. So I started Breaking Christian Nationalism, and here we are today. Everyone see one or the other screen? Great. Okay, a little bit of housekeeping. Be respectful. Personal insults, harassment, or name calling will not be tolerated. I'll give you one warning. If there's 2 instances, I'm sorry, but you will be asked to leave. This is a safe space, a space of learning, and not debate. Next, this is not a debate. There are plenty of spaces, both virtually and physically out there, where you can debate to your heart's content, and I welcome you to do that. But here tonight, that's not what this is for. That's not what we're here for. Also, you'll see that this event is being recorded. My presentation, as well as the discussion that will follow. If you would like a copy of that recording, make sure that your email is on the papers in the back. And make sure it's legible. All right, the First Amendment. Congress shall make no law respecting establishment of religion or prohibiting the exercise thereof. I'm going to stop right there because that's what we're here for tonight. This is from our U.S. Constitution. So, this means that the United States is not, I repeat, not a Christian nation. So what is this thing called Project 2025? It is a manifesto of said Christian Nationalist agenda. We're going to go over what exactly Christian Nationalist is in just a moment, but do know that it is a manifesto. It's not a checklist, it's not a wish list, it's a manifesto. It has been in the making since the 1980s, but it has its roots all the way back to the 1950s. And what it seeks to do is dismantle the government as we know it, and then reconstitute it under a very, very wide presidential power. Sounds a little bit like a dictatorship to me, but we'll see. Project 2025 also seeks to strip the American people of our civil liberties, our safety, our privacies, all the while they're telling us how to live, what is acceptable and what is not acceptable, and further, what will be tolerated and what will not be tolerated. So who is behind Project 2025? You would think, well, not a lot of people are going to go for this, but folks are. There are 100 groups, probably more now, that are advising the creators of Project 2025. I really wanted to highlight a few here so you all know what we're dealing with when we're talking about Project 2025. First, the Alliance Defending Freedom. This organization undermines the rights of women, LGBT community. It is listed as an anti-LGBT hate group by the Southern Poverty Law Center. A little alarming is that they are currently appealing a federal court ruling upholding state-level bans on conversion therapy for minors. That, I don't like that, but we'll move on. Moms for Liberty is the next example. They advocate against school curricula that mention the LGBTQ rights, race and ethnicity, critical race theory, and discrimination. Ban books on these topics from school curricula and libraries. They are listed on the Southern Poverty Law Center as an anti-government group. These folks, you may have seen them in your school boards. The other one that you may have seen in your schools and colleges is Turning Point USA. This is led by Charlie Kirk. This is the MAGA youth wing of the conservative movement. And Kirk says the church should accept its rightful role as counselor to and moral authority of the government. These are the organizations that are advising the creators and the authors of Project 2025. So you've heard of the Heritage Foundation, who is actually the think tank behind Project 2025. You may also have heard that, oh, Project 2025, it's just a think tank. I've heard that I'm fear-mongering by letting people know what's going on here, but I will. So the mission of the Heritage Foundation is to formulate and promote public policy based on the principles of free enterprise, limited government, individual freedom, traditional American values, and a strong national defense. Now, honestly, when I read that, I'm like, what's wrong with that? Until I read deeper. And this I know from reading Project 2025, you'll get the first paragraph and it sounds real good. But if you stop there, you miss all of these things that we're going to talk about today. So they say free enterprise, but what they really mean is big business and corporations, which is to the detriment of family-owned businesses and entrepreneurs. They say limited government, but what that means is they want to lift the regulations so those corporations can make more money. They say they want individual freedoms, but only for people like them. If you don't fit in that nice little box that we're going to talk about in just a minute, you don't get freedoms. You might get thrown in jail. And then traditional American values, Christian Nationalist values, which is what we're here for to talk about tonight. And what they want is their own special form of Christianity, which is really not Christianity. And they want us, the other folks, to just deal with it. I know, kind of sucks. Okay, so Christian nationalism has been around, as I said, for decades. However, many people have many different definitions of the term. This is the definition that when I use Christian nationalism, this is what I'm saying. It's an ideology that defines the morals, behaviors, and lifestyles of all, according to a particular set of beliefs that its supporters call Christian. If you do not conform to this set of behaviors you are punished and not accepted in society. Christian nationalism warps the traditions and sacredness of the Christian religion to retain power and wield more control. That is a direct quote from myself and Breaking Christian Nationalism. What is the threat of Christian nationalism? In my mind, it is that our democracy will become a theocracy. We've seen what happens when a country becomes a theocracy. We see it in Yemen, Saudi Arabia, Russia, Iran, and Malta. And what is more, a quote from Christians Against Christian Nationalism: the Christian in Christian nationalism is more about identity than religion. It carries with it assumptions about nativism, white supremacy, authoritarianism, patriarchy, and militarism. What we're going to talk about tonight is just a brief skim of the top of the iceberg. I recommend that you read Project 2025 yourself, get your hands on anything that you can, and really learn what this document is saying. Okay, so now we get into the text of it. Now I'm only going to read a couple of these because I am going to have this presentation available to you, and I just wanted you to see that people, myself included, are not just pulling these things out of the air. It's actually in the text. So, redefining the family. Married men and women are the ideal natural family structure because all children have a right to be raised by the men and women who conceived them. And that's on page 449. What that doesn't talk about, or actually what it does talk about, is a man who conceived the child could be a rapist, could be incest, could be an abuser. But that child, according to this document, has a right to be raised by that person. And the next thing that we look at, we'll look at the third one here. Social science reports that access the outcomes for children raised in homes aside from a heterosexual intact marriage are clear. All other family forms involve higher levels of instability. I'm just going to stop right there. That is on page 481. So what that's saying is that a heterosexual intact marriage is more stable than a same-sex marriage or a single parent family. I would beg to differ from my personal history. And the last one that we'll look at is this last one here, and that's on page 62. And it says the president should appoint a point of contact with the rank of special assistant to the president. This means obviously reporting directly to the president. And they will, let me see, hold on just a moment. This position would be responsible for facilitating meetings, discussions, agreements among personnel, so they're going to make this happen, coordinating administration policy, they're going to put it into policy, and ensuring agency support for implementation. So if you don't do this, you're going to get fined, you're going to get out of business, you're going to get no funding, etc., etc. That's our new family, folks. Are we excited? Next, they are going to be dictating our societal roles. There are 4 choices, just 4. You can be a mother, you can be a father, you can be a spouse, or you can be a child. That's all you get. No authors, no travelers, nothing like that. Those are the only 4 that are acceptable in this new society. Let's go to the mandate. On page 4, we see the most important community in each of our lives. That's yours, and yours, and yours, and yours. The most important community is the family. So there you go. Hope you enjoy that. The next thing is, let's look at the third one. For the sake of child well-being, programs should affirm that children require and deserve both the love of a nurturing mother and the play and protection of a father. So what's a mother allowed to do? Nurture. No protection, no play. Nurture. What's a father allowed to do? A father is to protect. Mothers can't do that. So they are defining what we do in society. It sounds so extreme, but it is throughout this document. These are merely just little tidbits here and there. It's like that chocolate chip cookie. You know, there's chocolate in the whole cookie, but you only see it when it is concentrated. All right, now let's look at the last one. The last one is probably my favorite. It is from page 587, and it's talking about the Department of Labor. The Department of Labor should rededicate its research budget toward open inquiry, especially to disentangle the influences on women's workplace participation, and to understand the true causes of the earning gap between men and women. You thought it was an equality thing, huh? They have different ideas. So that's what we have to look forward to in these societal roles. Next is dictating religion. Very exciting. Okay, so we'll go with the first one here from page 454. If the CDC should fund studies into the risk and complication of abortion and ensure that it corrects and does not promote regarding the comparative health and psychological benefits of childbirth versus the health and psychological risks of intentionally taking a human life through abortion. Because we all know that's the only thing that abortion's for, right? No, it's not. But that's what they say it is. Next is, I'll go on the third one on page 483. Restore Trump religious and moral exemptions to the contraceptive mandate. How many of you have heard, oh, they're not going to go after our contraceptives? Yes. Yes, they are. And it's in more than one place. The last thing that we'll do for religion, and again, you'll get this presentation so you can read it for yourself here. We're going to go on the last one here, page 589. And it's talking about your Sundays. You know those football days? Yeah. You may not be able to watch football because it may be you need to rest today. God ordained the Sabbath as the day of rest, and until very recently, the Judeo-Christian tradition sought to honor that mandate by moral and legal regulation of that workday. Congress should encourage communal rest by putting it into law. So, you're told when to rest. That's very exciting. Great to be an American. Now we're going to talk about securing funding. I know that some of our panelists here will be able to speak more about that, but what we have here is Texas money. Texas appears in the mandate 31 times. We're one state, 31 times. Many of you know our friends Tim Dunn and Ferris Wilks. And this comes from our friend James Tallarico's Twitter account. And that's where I got this here. And remember those advisors that we were talking about earlier? 2 of these are on that list. The Texas Public Policy Foundation and First Liberty Institute. So you're wondering if Project 2025 is backed by Wilkes and Dunn money? I would say the answer is yes. Lastly, we'll see the Heritage Foundation's top donors. I have to be honest, I haven't looked into these in great detail because I just didn't have time. But I am sure that these are along those same lines as well. That's the end of this presentation. If you have any questions or comments, you can email me at this email address here. I thank you for your time and attention. And now we are going to go into the panel discussion of this evening. And I'm going to have our panelists come up here. What they are going to do is they are going to spend a couple minutes talking to you about what they do and who they are. I am personally very excited for each and every one of these panelists. They have such great knowledge, and thank you for being here tonight. I don't know who wants to go first. This mic open or
Can you hear me?
yeah.
Charles Johnson's my name. I lead an organization called Pastors for Texas Children. And we mobilize, we're clergy, and we mobilize ministers and faith leaders for public education advocacy. We have a 501c3 organization that has just entered its 12th year. And we have a 501c4 organization that is seeking to get good people elected to the Texas legislature. And our main contribution, I think, to the social uplift is we have played a role in blocking private school vouchers, which right now in Texas is the #1 vehicle, in my opinion, for Christian nationalism. I'm a pastor in Fort Worth at Bread Fellowship, a little tiny church that meets in Fairmount, and I am back at my old church in Lubbock as interim pastor. I'll be flying out first thing in the morning. Second Baptist Church of Lubbock, 2 good congregations. Chris and Mindy have been friends since the beginning, and I turn the microphone over to Mindy.
Thank you, Charlie. We're grateful to have Charlie as a friend of ours for a long time. So my name is Mindy Tackett, and my cohort Chris here. We are from originally down the road in Granbury. That's our hometown. And in 2014, Chris ran for school board. He won that seat, and that was really exciting. But at that point on, we really began to see what we now know as Christian nationalism taking over Hood County and Granbury. Chris really started digging into the money, which a lot of it was Tim Dunn and Ferris Wilkes, and we started to get loud about that. And I really started to dig into the why behind it, which was Christian nationalism. And we have a website that we run called seeitnameitfightit.com. And we have resources and and there's things that we write on Substack and so on and so forth, and lots of resources that you can access. So I'm going to pass it on to Chris.
Hey everybody, she's definitely the better half. Yeah, we've partnered for, again, it's crazy, a decade at this point on trying to talk about these things in forums like this, right? Just trying to help. We're just regular everyday people who saw things happen in our hometown, and it freaked us out. And we knew that the kinds of things that were being pushed, we didn't want to have imposed on us in our public school, in our local community. And we realized as we were going through this how big a web it really was. And some of the Tallarico web, I mean, we've visited with Tallarico and helped him understand it. If any of you have seen the documentary that CNN did, Deep in the Pockets of Texas, we were very instrumental in helping that story get told. So that is truly the space that Mindy and I have played in, is just really trying to be the squeaky wheel. And we named our organization See It, Name It, Fight It, because look, there are so many people out there who are going through their day not realizing any of this is happening because they're so focused on just getting through the day, right? Getting their kids to a soccer practice or dealing with what's going on in their job. And you have to take that moment to step back and actually see the things happening around you, right? Until that point, you don't realize anything is wrong. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Now, once you've seen it, you've got to be able to put a name to it, right? And for us, it was that light bulb of what we see happening is Christian nationalism. And then starting to understand where it goes. Because until you've seen it, until you can actually put a name to it, you don't know how to fight it. And that's the thing that we all have to do in whatever our little space is figure out how do we help others see it, name it, and then they can join the fight too.
Man. You're a good speaker, huh? I am not a good speaker, so just someone build a wall in front of me again. Okay, my name is Tina, and I am the executive director and the founder of Place. We are an LGBTQ 501c3 nonprofit based here in Parker County. And building off of what you say, when you see something, it's really hard to ignore it. My daughter came out when she was in 8th grade. She's a senior now. And building off of that, being a parent, trying to parent through someone coming out. And at the time, I was a children's pastor, so it was very hard and very isolating and very, I don't know what the heck I was doing. So from that, and trying to connect with other individuals and parents to find community, Place was born. We are a community, have been a community organization for 4 years, nonprofit for 2 years. We give out trans clothes, and we give out safe sex kits, and hopefully soon HIV and STI testing kits. And we go out into Hood and Palo Pinto and Arath. That's a little bit of us. Here you go.
I'm Stephen Monticelli. I'm an investigative journalist. I live in Dallas. I write for a number of places, but often places like the Texas Observer, Texas Monthly, D Magazine, in the past Rolling Stone, Wired, some other places. And I focus a lot on politics and extremism. A little bit about me, I grew up in Tarrant County, in Colleyville, which has been in the news a lot for everything that's gone on with the school district there and the neighboring school districts in South Lake and Keller. I've done a little bit of reporting on some of that. And my expertise that I've sort of developed over the past few years is dark money in politics, which is sort of similar to the work that the panelist here does, as well as digging into extremist networks and sort of identifying anonymous extremists as well. So something I published a few months ago was the identity of a neo-Nazi fight club leader here in Parker County, which is a thing that exists and is real. That group no longer exists. It got subsumed into another neo-Nazi fight club, of which there are several in the nation. These small little cells of white supremacists that like to beat up on each other. And that's concerning, obviously, for reasons, but I've also reported on things that are much more related to what we're talking about here tonight, like Christian nationalism. So I've done a lot of reporting into money and school board campaign finance and sort of the networks involved there and how that overlaps as well with another network of Christian nationalist organizations called the Remnant Alliance, which has been super active recently in school boards and features Turning Point USA as one of its coalition members, as well as some other names that you may have heard of. So I'm glad to be able to be here tonight and talk about this important issue.
Okay, we have a couple of things that I'm just going to sit over here and chat with you guys, if that's okay. First of all, I heard about, is it the Remnant Alliance?
Yeah.
I heard about that. Can you guys tell us a little bit more about that and what they're doing?
Sure. So you can Google this as well to get the whole story. I believe it's called the Remnant Alliance. It's coming for a school board near you. And the Remnant Alliance is this network of groups that sort of formalized over the last year. And these groups have been active in politics sometimes for decades in some instances, other times a little less time, such as Citizens Defending Freedom, if that's a name that rings a bell for you. That's another group that's involved here. And the sort of overall mission of this group is to combine the efforts of these sort of independent groups, these groups that have been doing the work on their own, to do a few key things, but their main goal is to identify pastors who they can train to then, basically use their talking points in their sermons to then activate their churches to get their congregation to then go to trainings at places like Patriot Academy, which if you've heard of that, you know what I'm talking about there. And if you haven't, it's basically this political training organization started by a former state rep that promotes biblical citizenship and the sorts of buzzwords that you start to recognize when you dig into Christian nationalism. And this organization, the Remnant Alliance, one thing it has really notably is that I think it's, with the exception of one or two of the organizations that are charter members, every single one of them is led by a member of an organization, called the Council on National Policy, which it's been around since the Reagan Revolution, and their whole objective is to basically create these long-term strategies for extending, the vision of the Reagan Revolution, and connecting big donors with political activists who can realize these plans over many years, if not decades. So what they're really doing right now is going around this state, other states, finding these pastors, bringing them into the fold, activating their congregations, and turning them into political machines, specifically to support certain sorts of candidates that they deem to be biblical values candidates. And once you start to understand what that means, it all ties back into what we're talking about here today. Not all those members of that group are listed on this sheet that you got here. At least one of them is, but they're certainly swimming in the same direction.
Does anyone else have anything to say about that organization and maybe their experience?
I can't talk what Stephen just talked.
Well, the frightening thing is that they're in the churches, right? They're coming into churches.
And yes, and moreover, there's this clear overlap with GOP apparatus in the state of Texas.
Yes, please.
I might be a little more qualified to speak to that.
They're coming into a certain type of church.
Yes.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
And so basically, this is a little bit of a generalization, but basically what you and I grew up with in church as the definition of church, they're not in those communities. The Methodist, Baptist, the community-based church that's on the courthouse square, there's some exceptions to this. But basically, they're coming into the new style, what the media, when the media refers to as political evangelicals, a lot of those churches, Mercy Culture is a big church in Fort Worth that's propagating this. And so this, no generalization is completely true, including this one Disraeli said. You're going to find pockets of Christian national. Maybe you're more familiar with the term fundamentalism or religious fundamentalism. This is very, very similar, although I think it's a good thing what Bridget's doing in trying to alert us and educate us about Christian nationalism, because the Heritage Foundation is using that term, and a lot of these organizations, you'll find that the same members are a part of all 100 of these organizations. So you have a pretty small group of people, but you have a lot of money, and they replicate themselves through all these organizational brands to give the impression that they are this hegemony in our society. I don't think that's true. And when you go talk to your neighbor, which is the most important thing I can challenge us to do, go talk to your neighbor. You'll find a lot of common ground with your neighbor. And when you ask your neighbor, do you think the government ought to promote your particular brand of religion? Most Texans are going to say no. And when you use the example that Bridget used, we got that in Saudi Arabia. How's that working over there? Not very well. And when you start casting it that way in your language, with your categories, using your experience, whether you're religious or not, whether you're a part of the church community or not, your neighbor's going to pay attention to you.
Okay, thank you. So the next question is, how will our education system be impacted by Project 2025? Chris?
Well, I think one of the big things as we think about education broadly, right? And Project 2025 touches on some of it, right? But I think really taking some of this down to what we see happening in Texas, right? Charlie talked about the fight against vouchers that's going on right now. I mean, that's really central to probably almost everybody in this room, right? Is the desire to support public education and understanding really where that push for vouchers comes from. In Bridget's presentation, she talked about the roots of a lot of these things and where the fight comes from. The goal in this attack on public education broadly is to either take public dollars out and route them into, in most cases, religious private schools. And failing their ability to do that, they want to inject religion into our public schools, right? And sometimes it's trying to do both at the same time. This all goes back to 1954 and the Brown v. Board of Education decision by the Supreme Court, desegregating public schools. At that moment, the push for vouchers became very real. Milton Friedman, the economist, started talking about this need for vouchers immediately after that decision. And what we started to see was segregation academies pop up all across the South, so that wealthy, white homeowners and members of communities could make sure their kids weren't going to school with anyone who was different. Now, as we moved into the Civil Rights Act and things continued, it made it harder for them to do those sorts of things, to do some of the scholarships and some of the ways they were diving around. It came back to, we just need our legislatures to put vouchers into play. And again, they will call it lots of different things, right? It's a voucher, it's an education savings account, it's an opportunity credit for businesses to be able to divert tax dollars over. But the reality is, it is all about taking your public school and making it worse. The play we've seen in Texas is the play happening all across the country, in that if you can starve your public school, you can make people afraid of your public school. They are much more likely to say, maybe we need a voucher, right? Maybe I don't need my kid to be in that public school. And it comes into all of these places. It's the attacking the LGBTQ students, it's the book bans, it's the claims of CRT and DEI, and all of these things that are just manufactured to drive outrage. We lived through book bans in Granbury ISD, right? I read the books that our district was banning. And we got in the news for lots of other, they wanted more books banned, right? We didn't have enough banned. But what they want to do with your public schools is create this space where, again, those who are well off will get a tax break, basically, to send their kids to a private school where they can actually be indoctrinated, right? They will claim, hey, we want education, not indoctrination. Their whole goal is they want to indoctrinate. They don't want people to be critical thinking. That's what Project 2025 wants to do, is control who gets education, who gets this kind of education. And that's the thing we all have to understand.
I'm going to follow up on that for just 1 second too. So a key tenet at the very beginning of Project 2025 is to abolish the Department of Education. And the Department of Education does a lot of things, but and we know this from our book ban stuff, right? Because there's an open case for Granbury ISD with the Department of Education, the Office of Civil Rights. And that's one of the things that the Department of Education does, is they look out for all kids and all educators. No matter who you are or what your background is, you deserve to be represented, and you deserve to have a place at the table, and you deserve to have a safe place to be educated. And we see this idea of abolishing the Department of Education. It's in the Texas Republican Party platform, it's in the National Republican Party platform, and it's in Project 2025. And I guarantee you, if you went through the other 50 states and looked at the Republican, or 49 states, and looked at the Republican Party platform, abolishing the Department of Education is a core common theme in all of them. So,
I think going off of that is, has anybody noticed the rise of demonizing teachers and making them the bad guys? The rise of not having safe teachers in schools is severely hurting any child that is different. Because when you stop letting people be compassionate in classrooms, you close doors for children to just be themselves, or they don't want to come and have an education. And the steady rise of teachers leaving in exodus, the school system, that's also making school systems from this bad, that you don't want to send your children to a bad public education. So you're going to choose a private school or a charter or homeschool. And that further alienates, there we go, there's the word, alienates just all kids, but more the LGBTQ kids, because they barely have safe places as it is. So systematically, just like taking like the colored kids away from the white kids, we are also segregating into wage classes, into gender classes, into socioeconomic classes, and then we're taking the good teachers away from those because they don't want to do it anymore. They don't want to be put up with all the hoops that we're making them jump through, so they stop wanting to teach at all.
Anyone else have anything to say about education system?
Well, I got a lot to say about it. A whole lot. That's what our mission's all about.
And my friends have hit the nail on the head. Christopher Rufo is a activist out of an organization called the Manhattan Institute in New York, who is a proponent of so-called school choice. This is the euphemism for vouchers. By the way, a voucher is an authorization that the state of Texas gives to a family to take your tax dollars to subsidize, Mindy said it, their private education. That's what a voucher is, and it goes by many names. Chris named some. Christopher Rufo said, in order to achieve universal school choice, we have to produce universal school distrust. And my fellow panelists hit the nail on the head. Demonize teachers, demonize schools, attack. We see insidious forms of it. Our mayor in Fort Worth is now leading with the city council an attack on Fort Worth public schools. She has no solutions. She has no remedies. Over 90% of our children in Fort Worth schools are poor. When the school performs inadequately on a standardized test, that is an indication of neighborhood poverty. That's all it is. Underpaid and overworked teachers, no social emotional supports, children that live in food deserts with food insecurity, all kinds of social pathologies in the neighborhood and in the home. And whenever you have a politician advancing her career on the backs of poor children, you've got an immoral dynamic in your community. Now, what we do is mobilize a lot of ministers to say no to that. No to that universal school distrust that is plowing the ground for so-called universal school choice. Chris said it, a voucher is a subsidy of somebody else's religion with your tax dollars. Now, according to the private school website, I've forgotten the name of the organization, Texas Association of Private Schools. We have 750,000 private school. I'm getting it backwards. According to the homeschool website, they say we have 750,000 children who are homeschooled. The private school organization says we have 250,000 private schools. That's 1 million kids with a $10,000 voucher. If they all take it, it'll be a $20 billion plus tax bill that you'll pay for. That basically is advancing a mercy culture kind of theology. Bridget just outlined it. We don't need to go over it again. Subordination of women, supremacy of white people over colored people, the option, God's preferential option toward America as opposed to every other country, and all kinds of things that most Americans don't agree with. You know, we've got a presidential, vice presidential candidate that is giving us a big old batch of good wisdom. Mind your own damn business. This is an American value and it's a Texas value. And now we have a governor, we have a lieutenant governor, we've got half a legislature that wants to promote a particular kind of Christian religion. This is, you can use all kinds of modifiers. It is white Christian nationalism. It is fundamentalist white Christian nationalism. And America is a lot more complex than this. And America has Jewish folks and Muslim folks and Hindu folks and Christian all. We've got 26 Baptist denominations alone. I was on an interview with the Fort Worth Report, a media outlet, y'all know the Fort Worth Report, with a Methodist minister, and the young reporter got to overhear me and Pastor Mary talk about our own disagreements about theology, about baptism, about doctrine. I always use the example. Unfortunately, our Catholic bishops, and I bet we've got Roman Catholic friends in this very room, our Catholic bishops are promoting this voucher because they want your tax dollars to underwrite and subsidize their Catholic schools. Friends, I'm a Baptist preacher. I don't believe the Pope is infallible. And I don't want to support and subsidize a school that teaches that to children anymore. And Catholic folks want to underwrite and subsidize my Baptist school that believes in something called the priesthood of all believers, which is that ain't nobody got any right to pull rank on anybody else spiritually. My Catholic friends don't believe that. They believe in something called apostolic succession and the primacy of the priest and so forth. I respect that. We teach respect in the public schools. We teach tolerance in the public schools. It's already been said that the public school is the institution in our neighborhood that advances American values. There's nothing Christian about Christian nationalism, and there's nothing really even properly patriotic about Christian nationalism. It's a violation of both.
And just to add something very briefly to the education piece, I think we all know that public schools are important because they have a basically legal commitment to serving all students regardless of their needs. And we all know that private schools don't have that same requirement. And so if we move into a world where private schools are sort of preferred in this way, or parents are starting to have to move their students out of failing public schools, they're going to have to look out to this environment, this landscape, and say which of these schools is potentially going to say no to my kid because maybe they have a special need. And then on top of it, people will say, oh, well, they're getting money so they can pay for whatever school that'll accept their kid. Well, a Princeton study pretty clearly showed that in states where these bills have been passed, the average price of tuition just goes right up. And the folks at the Heritage Foundation, I assume they like economics, or at least they claim to. And it's pretty basic economics that, yeah, of course this price is going to go up if they can get away with it. And they certainly can. It seems like they can get away with raising the price. And so what ends up happening is it's not just that these religious institutions are being subsidized by the government, but it's that wealthy people who can already afford to send their children are being subsidized by the government. And then the people who can't afford to pay for the best schools are going to just be, picking what they can get. And the universal institutions will have a weekend in the process.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. We'll do one more question and then we'll open it up to the audience for questions for the panel. The question is, losing our democracy. What is the probability of that? Who wants to go first?
So I think it depends on what you mean by losing our democracy. I don't think you can conceive of it as a single boom. This bang, and it happens and it's over. It's one of those things where it gets eroded over time. So what is the probability that our democratic institutions could be eroded over time? Well, one example of that is in the state GOP party platform where they proposed this idea. They tossed around this idea of basically creating a state-level electoral college where the governor could get the popular vote, but if they don't carry the majority of all the counties, they can't win the governorship. Some people would look at that and say, that kind of seems anti-democratic. And people can quibble about, oh, well, is the National Electoral College anti-democratic? And there's some arguments to be made there. But that sort of probability is, I think, real in that we could see a small, shrinking minority of people maintain control through these sorts of anti-democratic maneuvers. Is democracy going to implode on January 1st or January 2nd if there's a transfer of power? I don't think so. But are we in a position that is very concerning, particularly as it relates to things like the Supreme Court?
Right.
We absolutely are, and we have seen this in our history before.
That's right.
So there are, some lessons to be learned there in terms of how we could get through a pretty terrible stretch of time. But I'm an optimist, so I prefer to try and see that there is potential for us to maintain a semblance of a democracy in our country, even if election results go a way that you may not prefer. And it's important not to overstate these stakes because, then you may be crying wolf. You may be doing the sort of thing that you're looking at these other people and saying, how can you get away with this?
I'll add a little bit to this, and I'll speak specifically to Project 2025. And I absolutely agree with everything Stephen said. The only thing that I would point out as it relates to Project 2025. So our friend Kevin Roberts, who had headed up the Texas Public Policy Foundation here in Texas for several years, is now the head of the Heritage Foundation. And he has specifically made an agreement with the Heritage Foundation with Viktor Orban's Danube Institute. And so the idea is he very intentionally is looking to replicate what is happening in Hungary and countries like that. So while I agree with Stephen, I don't think everything implodes on day one. I think when you look at the relationships that are out there that have crafted this document, and I think when you read through the document and you understand that the big broad idea is to collapse government as we know it, federal government as we know it, to place the power of what we have experienced, what we've known as our government. We have these independent government entities, right? Different departments. They're either going to shut them down or they're going to give direct control to executive power under the presidency, which, whichever way that, if it goes to Trump, that's their plan. And so I do think that we have a real threat of not overnight, but definitely their goal is to change democracy as we know it. And our government won't function the same way anymore because it will function for them. It won't function for all of us.
Right.
So.
Mindy, Chris, I'd like for y'all also, as a sub-point to this question, Bridget, to talk about how the big money has already compromised democracy for these people in their most recent elections for the House of Representatives.
Yeah, the reality, when we think about representative democracy, right, the idea is one person, one vote, right? And when you start to see And look, gerrymandering is removing elements of our democracy. Creating these little carve-outs where you know exactly who is going to be elected. Not the person, right, but the party. The person from the party. And when you start to see those extreme gerrymandered spaces, and you're only running in a primary, the race is how far can I go to an extreme, which now isn't truly representing all of the people who live in that district. If you live in a deep red space, we did in Hood County, right? When I was serving on a school board and our representative told us he was going to support public education and went to Austin every time and voted against public education, right? Voice got lost in our community. We didn't understand. You get representatives who aren't interested in touching everybody and representing everybody. It's only those wealthiest donors who are the ones funding their organization or funding their campaign. And it's not just billionaires giving dollars directly to candidates. It's billionaires funding multiple political action committees, pushing dollars into all of these groups that sound rather innocuous, maybe even something that, well, that sounds like a group that's doing the right thing. And realistically, what they're doing is driving an agenda. And for low information voters, right, those people who haven't seen it yet, they see all these flyers showing up in their mailboxes as we approach a primary, as we approach a general election. And all of them are saying, this is the person you should vote for. Here's all of these flyers. I got 10 showing up in a day, right? And they're all saying, different groups saying, this is the person I should vote for. And then you start to get below that surface and you see it and you understand it's the same couple of billionaires running all of these political action committees. And not only are they funding all these political action committees, nonprofits who are also going after things on policy. And what they're doing is either demotivating people to not vote because they feel like it doesn't matter. And because sometimes the push is against the person who's not extreme, right? And they're just trying to say they're bad too. We saw it with this voucher fight with the American Federation for Children, pushing, giving all this money to Greg Abbott to go after candidates who voted against vouchers. And they went after them not on their voucher vote, but on other totally unrelated things. And it is all designed to take away your voice in our representative government. And we've got a handful of billionaires that, we like to talk about, like we've done and Wilkes. And look, we've got Donald Trump as the leader in the Republican Party right now. But the thing to understand is no matter how this election goes, none of this apparatus is going away. So it is not just a fight for today. It is not just a fight for tomorrow. It's a fight we have to gear up for and understand we have to be vigilant. Because again, so much of this goes back to the 1950s and further back. These movements, these groups have been, it's the long game working on this. And it's the money, it's the ideology, and honestly, it's the racism, right?
And homophobia.
And it's the fear of the different, right? And when you think about what Project 2025 really wants to do to democracy, it's not going to change anything overnight for people who look like me. It starts to change your ability to receive services, to have voice, to have access in this country for anyone who is different. They want to take us back. When they talk about Make America Great Again, when they talk about this vision of America, it's early 1950s America. When who was the ones in charge of everything? It was the straight white, Christian men. That's what they're shooting for. There was lots of people who had no voice in a democracy at that point. That's what they want to go back to.
Well, I guess we have a lot of fighting to do. But right now, let's ask some questions. Who has questions? Okay.
You mentioned the countries of Hungary, Turkey, Russia, Venezuela, China. They're authoritarian regimes. They're actually run more like the mafia. And my concern is this kind of mafia type of mentality about like corporations that have a dual purpose. One is to do what major corporations do, make money, control markets, but more than that, they're also a function of the state. And it's not just going back to the 1950s, we're talking about instituting a fascist regime, more like Nazi Germany or fascist Italy. And that's my concern, but the good news about it is like Russia can't even fight a war properly because it's so corrupt. Its space program's gone because they can't function because of the corruption. There's not any integrity to the institutions, but it's a threat. So my question is about dismantling the federal government, is weaponizing the FBI, the DOJ, our local police, as fascist agents, actually. That's my more concerns. And make it where you can't trust anybody, where people will just report on each other. I mean, that goes on in authoritarian regimes all the time, particularly in South America. Anyway, just to make comments about that.
I think you have just spoken prophetically and powerfully, and we're just about there in Texas. We already have an attorney general who's weaponizing his office.
Yes.
I heard today that he's bringing suit against Austin. He already has against Houston. We have a Texas Education Agency, TEAC, that requires social studies teachers in high schools to register kids to vote. Talk about voter register, 18-year-old seniors to register to vote. Now the Attorney General is criminalizing that activity against the explicitly stated statute. We have let me just say that, well, I'll say it, why not? The governor and the lieutenant governor finds our donors and calls them and threatens them to Pastors for Texas Children. How do I know that? Because they told me.
Threaten with what?
You will have no influence if you give those goddamn preachers one more penny. You will have no influence with me, quote unquote. So influence brokerage, trafficking, weaponizing the power of the legal apparatus, all of this is already happening. As public school teachers, it's already been said, who are cowering in fear and leaving the profession. And you heard it here first. What's happening in Fort Worth right now is paving the way for the state takeover of Fort Worth schools. Mark my words. And the philanthropic community of Fort Worth is behind it. Go read who signed the mayor's letter last week, 2 weeks ago. Who owns schools in Weatherford? I'm looking at them. You own Weatherford Public Schools. Not the governor, not the lieutenant governor. You do. And you ought to be the authority about what is taught our children. We've got the problem that already exists. that exists in Hungary and Saudi Arabia?
I'll briefly follow that up with, Project 2025 calls for eliminating, purging a purity test of 40 to 50,000 federal employees and appointees, and they do intend to reinstate people who are Trump loyalists. We have seen that same pattern already happening here in Texas. When you hear people like Brian Harrison and Tony Tinderholt, folks like that, Nate Schatzline out of Mercy Culture in Fort Worth. These are all state representatives who are dead set on there will not be Democratic voice in Texas politics, in the Texas legislature. So this idea of purity test, that if you don't follow our ideals, our ideology, and our desires, you don't have voice, and we will not represent you. And we will shut everything down that might benefit you. So Project 2025 definitely intends to purge employees. Chris and I were speaking at a group a couple weekends ago, doing a presentation on Project 2025. And as we talked about this part, there was a woman who was retired FBI, and she stood up and she said, most everyone that I worked with was a Republican, but they are terrified of this happening. And not only do we have a purity test, but think about the years of knowledge and expertise. And so many of these people, they show up and don't bring their politics through the door when they do their job every day. They're serving each one of us, no matter what side of the aisle we fall on. And Project 2025 and the folks who have put that together aim to put a stop to that.
Questions?
Okay.
So I wanted to ask, so right now, obviously, Project 2025 is not in effect, but what sort of issues are being felt, especially in smaller LGBT communities? Like what, how freaked out are people, how willing are people to be out? And then what sort of, what are the fears going forward? Like, whenever you bring it up to somebody, what do they say whenever you mention it? Like, do they mention, oh, I'm worried about, losing, my kid getting kicked out of school because they choose to identify some way, or, something like that?
Well, let's talk about statistics real quick. Statistically, a child has a 65% chance of survival of suicide if they have a safe place to go that is accepting of who they are. It dramatically drops if you don't have a safe space. It's like a 34% of survival rate of suicide, of teen suicide. Right now, rural Texas, we have a desert of testing sites. If we have mandates to take away services, free services, I don't know if you guys know the HIV rates here in Parker County or in any other rural counties, they're really high because we don't have testing sites. There is, I think it's 13% of the people that are a part of that community that are not even diagnosed, that they're walking around undiagnosed. So that is higher. We're on a risk of an epidemic again from like the 80s if they take away testing sites. Also, on top of that, the rise of STIs, not having proper education, no place to take people that are going to need help. Any nonprofit in our area like Unity Recovery, If they don't receive any more federal funding through their grants that they close, then there's one less place that's not Christian run that is offering recovery options for people who are addicts. There's a greater risk of people leaving in exodus, but also the disparity of just life in general. We are already living in a desert of opportunity here in rural communities. If we take away the very small amount of things that we already do have, there's going to be nothing left for the LGBTQ community in rural areas in Texas.
So not necessarily explicitly about 2025, but part and parcel to it are plans to, you would say, ban teachers who are gender nonconforming from being teachers in Texas public schools. This is something that Greg Abbott has explicitly called for.
Yeah.
And the impacts on students that could result in are potentially huge. And I've spoken to two different teachers who are out and trans, and they live in small, they don't live in the city in Dallas. They don't live in Houston. One of them lived in Uvalde, and one of them lives in Galveston, which is kind of big, but still. They live in communities that are not necessarily known for being universally accepting. But what they've actually said is their local community is fine. Their local community has been great to them. What they're scared about is the governor.
That's it.
The federal government.
That's right.
And any sort of massive shift that would result in them losing their rights. Because as far as I understand, it's explicitly discriminatory to say we shouldn't allow an entire class of people to.
And that's all by design. When the governor issues that opinion, he's on the political stump somewhere.
Yep.
When the attorney general files suit, all that is orchestrated out of that Heritage Foundation. Kevin Roberts attacks me on Twitter. Go figure. I don't know what his budget is. What is it? Big.
Yeah.
I know what mine is.
One real thing that has just made it like the last week that you were able to do it here in Texas is change your gender on your driver's license.
That's right.
After this, you cannot do that.
That's right.
The only thing that you can do it on are passports in Texas now. So if you have anyone that is trans in your family, they can't do it anymore.
Now, isn't that illegal? Didn't the court rule that they could, but the governor's saying no, or the DPS is saying no? That's just a question for me.
I don't know the answer on that one. But I will say another way that we're seeing this impact the LGBTQ community is, look, I got friends whose child is trans, and when the state banned gender affirming care, right, and them and multiple of the friends they have to make the very heartbreaking choice. Do I leave the state that has been my home and be forced to leave my friends and family and go somewhere else so that my child can be who they need to be? When you look at the lists of books that are being banned, over half of those books on almost every one of these lists feature LGBTQ characters in leads, right? And when you talk about the number of books that are in a school library, the number of books that feature LGBTQ students, that provide that window for students to see themselves through, is already an incredibly low number. And now you're attacking that very small population of books that allow kids to see their humanity in other places. One of the books that they banned in Granbury was called This Book is Gay. It's a sex ed book for queer kids. I mean, that's truly what it is. It was in our high school library. right? It wasn't in the elementary school, it wasn't in the middle school, it was in the high school library. We had a non-binary student at our house, and they were talking about books and how important representation was. And before we knew that book was being banned, they specifically brought that one up. And it was the book that they said saved their lives because they saw themselves in it and they knew what they felt wasn't weird. It was normal. That's what we're taking away from kids. That's what we're taking away from our communities. That can't be what we're about.
And Project 2025 has anti-LGBTQ sentiment woven through every single part of it, every section, every department. They want to erase it from, I mean, yes, they're going after communities of color, they are going after women, but they are hell-bent on going after and erasing the LGBTQ community.
And Mindy talked about the destruction, elimination, dismantling of the Department of Education. The truth of the matter is, these people want to eliminate public education. They want education to be a commodity on an open market, where the haves have it, the white, male, straight haves have it, and everybody else doesn't. You see, what's that television program that we all watched several years ago, The Handmaid's Tale?
New Gilead.
Gilead.
Are there any other questions? Okay, we'll go here and then over here.
I have one comment about some of these organizations coming into our churches, and I left a church because one of the organizations, one of the ladies in our group was going to the Concerned Women for America meetings, and she was bringing back that to our church and basically telling us how to vote. And it was, I did some research on the group, and sure enough, it ties back to the Heritage Foundation. So just to comment on that. The other thing, oh, I'm sorry.
Let me respond if I may. It usually happens like that. It usually isn't the top person in the congregation. It's a person like me and like you. Well, that saw cuts both ways, doesn't it? And, you want to be loving, you want to be a good neighbor to everybody. I mean, that individual heard something that scared the stew out of her. She comes back, she shares it in her Sunday school class. This is a voluntary assembly. This is the culture of America, the culture of Texas. I think the reason Bridget got us together is so that we can be prepared to answer that in an organic, one-on-one, natural, kind of way, the discourse of a friendship.
When I asked her if she had researched the information that she was bringing back and disseminating to the women, I asked her if she fact-checked it, and she said, well, not all of it. And so I pointed out the fact that I knew the very first one on the list was not true. And it came back to me later that she actually did check that out and told somebody, oh, she was right. So if one part isn't true, then how can you depend on any of the rest of it? But a lot of people don't do the research like I sometimes do, get a little weird about it.
Good for you.
The other thing I wanted to talk about was the back to the education, and it doesn't have to do with vouchers, but I have grandchildren that are in the public schools. And I found it very concerning when I read that they want to, any school that gets funding from the federal government, all the children in that school, public school, will be tested for military aptitude, and all of that information will go into a database. So I draw the conclusion that that is so when and if we ever return to the draft, or if they need a call-up, they will only be calling from the children in public school. so that the white, they preferred group, none of them will ever have to defend our country. And I find that very disturbing.
So yeah, it's the ASVAB test. And that's been something that is voluntary, and every public school student has the opportunity to do. Any kid can do it now if they would like to, but it will be a requirement for all public school students. And when you start putting it all together, right, and they've taken out the crop of kids that they want to have, it is safe and secured in whatever private school setting they would like to have them safe and secured. And then the kids they're not interested in are, and let's be honest, these are gonna be kids that, are lower income kids. They're not gonna have the means. Another thing that I think is important to point out about Project 2025 that kind of ties into this is that Project 2025 very explicitly looks to roll back work requirement and protections for adolescents, right? So when we think about whether it's the ASVAB, we think about the work protections, the ability, right now, we're not gonna send a 14-year-old into a meat packing plant, like happened during the Industrial Revolution. That's not gonna happen, but it will happen. And who is gonna get caught in this? A lot of children who have immigrated here, a lot of children who are lower income, children who don't have support systems at home that might, reflect what the crafters of Project 2025 look to be the traditional good family, right? And so once those kids are removed and they've got the kids that they really want to utilize to pull into military service. And military service is wonderful. I think that's wonderful, and we need people who want to do that. But it is very telling that they only want to target public school children and not any child that's going to school. Yeah.
Did y'all hear quickly, before the next question, on Tuesday, the State Board of Education will be meeting in Austin. They will be receiving testimony. We're going to testify before the hearing on this Bible-based curriculum now, where the Bible is not taught alongside the Quran or the Torah or other holy books. It's not an academic exercise. It's a doctrinaire kind of indoctrination, taking the tenets of a certain narrow interpretation of the tenets of the Christian faith. This is extraordinary. And it's being inserted into the academic curriculum of our public school students. And it's already been passed by the legislature, and now the State Board of Education is reviewing this content. It's already happening. Call Mike Alcott. He's your state representative. Call him. I'll look up the number while I'm here. I always love doing this. And generally speaking, they get 10 or 12 calls the next day. And they, that preacher's been on the stump again. By the way, let me tell you something. A half a dozen you organize, we've got enough people in this room to organize against Christian nationalism through Mike Alcott's representation. No, I'm not exaggerating. You get organized, 25 people get organized, and you go get 25 others, and they go get 25 others. A couple hundred votes determines a state house race, and maybe one of you needs to run against him next time. I think I'm violating our C3 status. And that's the way democracy works. And let me tell you something else. Tim Dunn and Ferris Wilkes and Greg Abbott lost 6 of those races. So they didn't win them all. It wasn't a clean sweep. And furthermore, they're going to lose some more in November. Throw that in too.
Thank you. We have enough time for one more question.
Nobody else wants to go.
So I guess my question is, I think you're not going far enough back when you say even the Industrial Revolution. This sounds like something back like medieval ages.
Well,
We're keeping the people that we want non-power, uneducated, that's very common back then. We're keeping the races that we don't deem as perfect as, that was also something very medieval. I'm also kind of concerned about the LGBTQ part of it. Why are you sexualizing children?
well, I think that's a very good point. I just happened to be thinking about Upton Sinclair's The Jungle. So that's, when I think about Project 2025 and what could happen, it's like an updated version, and it's very evocative of that time. And I'll pass this down to Tina because I think that would be her area of expertise. But absolutely, they've talked a lot about not sexualizing children, haven't they? Yet
The whole thing is sexualizing children.
It's weird, they're weird.
There's a word.
No one needs to know what's in a kid's pants at all.
Like, seriously.
No, it's weird. The push to gender a child, like really, is there a difference between a boy or a girl fourth grader in their demeanor and or actions, or does it really matter if they want to be called a girl one day? My 4-year-old thinks he's a turtle half the time. It doesn't really matter in the scope of existence. I think it's really weird that they want to keep making it a thing.
It's not just about gender though. They're making it sexual. They're saying the whole thing about having transgender is the same as pornography.
well,
Gender is not sexual or sexual.
Here's the thing to know, and always remember this. Everything that they talk about, everything they're accusing of, is projection. Every single time, it's projection.
Amen.
I mean, Charlie can tell you this over and over again in his experience. You turn around and they're doing exactly what
They're
they're
accusing.
accusing all of us of doing. So,
I think you said really good. You said all the things that I would also say.
Let me put in a plug, if I may, just a quick plug.
Stephen's work in the Texas Observer, they have been scrupulous. All of this. Dean, I'm glad to know you tonight. Chris and Mindy have been on top of this for years and years and years, and have, to inspiring fellow citizens. You don't need a lot of money. You just need a few people in a room, which is the reason I think we're all here, because a concerned citizen invited us. And I think it's fantastic. A couple of organizations, Bridget mentioned them, Americans for the Separation, Americans United for the Separation of Church and State is just a fine national organization. AU, go Google them, give them a little money. If you feel led to, they will email you back. Rachel Laser is the executive director, a friend of mine. I know the staff. It's the reason I'm here, because somebody emailed me asking me to come to your forum, Bridget. Baptist Joint Committee. Baptists are committed to church-state separation. Now, it won't be the big old Baptist, big steeple church always. It might be, but it might be your little country Baptist church. I don't want to deter you from engaging clergy, the Church of Christ, the Presbyterian, the little Episcopalian church. The Protestantism is based on the separation of church and state generally. Protestantism in America is definitely based on it. And I don't want to leave out the Catholic priests either. I think 90% of the Catholic priests are with us on all this. I do think the higher up you get, y'all, the higher up you get. One of my lines is for people who aren't involved in a religious community. Don't listen to any preacher you don't know. Don't listen to any preacher you do not know personally. Because the more remote that preacher gets from your real interpersonal relationship, the more he, and it's usually he's going to try to manipulate you. And that is the downside, the dark side of religion. It always has been, it always will be. On the other side of the coin, the more intimate, the smaller the congregation, the more interactive, the more egalitarian. If you don't see women on the platform, get out of that church as quick as you can. Because they're going to be espousing all of this.
Okay, can you tell us how, oh, it's off. Can you tell us how we can follow you all?
I'll start. I've got some flyers back there, pastorsfortexaschildren.com, and take a bracelet. If you know a pastor or a minister, we need to be better organized in Weatherford. And it's been said by my fellow panelists, the political class has succeeded in dampening the public trust. They have succeeded. And these intimidation tactics are already working. Years ago, I would speak before the convocation of the Weatherford ISD. And superintendents all over this state would have me come address teachers. I did one this year in Brownwood, Texas. And when you get down to the grassroots level, people are with us on this, y'all. I'm making you a promise. Go to the coffee shop, go to the Rotary Club, go to your Sunday school class. People go to your PTA meeting, go to your neighborhood association. People are with us on this. Yeah, pastorsfortexaschildren.com. I've got cards. Charlie at charlesfosterjohnson.com. Obviously, I'll show up if you invite me, or I'll send somebody. And we can turn. We're already we don't have a voucher program in Texas.
Right.
I'm looking at the reason why. And let me tell you something else. We're not going to have one. Don't be hard. Don't be hard. We've all got to work. I don't think we're going to have one.
I'm just going to say thank you to Bridget, and then I'm going to pass it to Chris to give our.
Yeah, the easiest place to find us is seeitnameitfightit.com. All one big long word. Mindy and I are both really active on Twitter. If you're there, I still post on Facebook every now and again, Instagram, those kind of things. But links to everything we do is on seeitnameitfightit.com. There are folks, my weird hobby that started so much of this was tracking campaign finance. I ripped the entire Texas Ethics Commission database every time they do a significant update. And because I hate the Texas Ethics Commission's way of finding stuff, I ripped the entire database and put it into pie charts and things like that, which make it way easier to understand where the money is coming and going. And you can link right to my campaign finance database right there from seeitnameitfightit.com.
And it's all free.
It's all free, right? Everything is free because Mindy and I see this as our civic duty, right? I mean, we want to make sure we get to live in the kind of place that we would all like to live in, and we're going to do what we can to make it happen. So thanks again for having us here tonight.
You can find our information on Facebook, on Instagram, and on TikTok, and I think Threads. And if you can, She has our business cards. It has a QR code. If you do not know how to use a QR code with your phone, I can show you how to do it. It has our website on the back, but mostly we're on Facebook. And thank you for inviting me in my awkwardness. Here you go.
Thanks for having us. It's a great conversation. You can find all of my work on my website, stephenmonticelli.com. So I've got a consolidated list of all the articles everywhere I write for. I'm also active on Twitter. You can follow me there. And if you like my work, you can directly support it through a Patreon that I have. So yeah, thanks for coming out and listening to us talk.
And he writes incredible articles,
Yes,
so
he
do
does.
go read his work.
Let's give them a big applause.